If someone acts overly aggressive to compensate for their short stature, we say they have a Napoleon complex. It is a globally recognized psychological shorthand for a very specific type of insecurity. Look at this chart showing men's heights in the late 18th century. It reveals the Emperor of France stood at 169 centimeters. At the time, the average French man was 165 centimeters. He wasn't short, he was slightly taller than average. To trace exactly how a statistically average man became the permanent face of short stature insecurity, we have to look past the battlefields and focus on a single grim afternoon. In 1821, after dying in exile on the remote island of St. Helena, Napoleon's body lay on an examination table. An unnamed French doctor was tasked with performing the final medical evaluation. While examining the body, this physician made two entirely separate physical mistakes. These two errors on the autopsy table would go on to ruin the emperor's physical legacy and kick off a bizarre century-long scavenger hunt. The doctor's first error came down to units. He measured the corpse and recorded the height as 5 feet 2 inches. However, he wrote this down using the traditional French measuring system. When we align the historical French inch against the standard British imperial inch, you can see the offset. 5 feet 2 inches in the French system translates to about 5'6" in British units. But the British military had zero interest in doing the math. They took that measurement exactly as written and applied it to their shorter imperial scale. British propagandists enthusiastically printed this uncorrected number in political cartoons and newspapers across Europe. Mocking the little corporal as a tiny, raging tyrant was a highly effective way to reduce the deep anxiety their own soldiers felt about facing his armies. This coordinated public relations campaign was helped out by a persistent optical illusion. Elite guards in European militaries were selected specifically for their imposing size. Because Napoleon was almost always surrounded by giant, towering bodyguards, anyone looking at him from a distance naturally assumed he was small. Between the hostile foreign press ignoring a conversion rate and the bad optics of standing next to very tall men, the physical reality of a military genius was permanently overwritten by a cartoon. But the doctor was not done with his work. Before completing the autopsy, he took his scalpel and made one permanent, entirely unauthorized cut into the emperor's remains. He severed Napoleon's penis. Instead of returning it to the body, the doctor quietly handed the detached tissue over to the local priest who had administered Napoleon's last rites. The priest's family kept the specimen hidden away as a private heirloom for a century. It didn't surface publicly until the 1920s, when a bookseller acquired it, put it on the commercial market, and shipped it across the Atlantic to America. The artifact drifted through various private collections until a 1977 auction in Paris. There, an eccentric American urologist successfully placed the winning bid to bring the biological relic home. The resting place for the biological remains of the man who conquered Europe was decidedly less than royal. The doctor simply placed the specimen inside a leather suitcase and shoved it under his bed in New Jersey, where it sat completely untouched for 30 years. When the urologist passed away, he left the suitcase to his daughter. She took on the responsibility of guarding the artifact, keeping it strictly shielded from the public eye. The man who commanded millions of soldiers and dictated the borders of nations had his most intimate remains reduced to a bizarre novelty item, collecting dust beneath a suburban mattress. In 2014, a documentary crew for Britain's Channel 4 set out to investigate the legend. They managed to track down the daughter in New Jersey and negotiated rare access to examine the contents of the suitcase. For the first time in nearly 2 centuries, investigators were able to apply modern, objective measurements to the physical remains of the emperor. This animated graphic demonstrates their final finding. According to the team's measurements, the preserved artifact was exactly 4 centimeters long. The way we remember historical figures is rarely determined by objective facts alone. It gets shaped by misread unit conversions, aggressive wartime propaganda campaigns, and the strange journeys of stolen physical evidence. Napoleon Bonaparte's enduring reputation as an unusually tiny man is nothing but a mathematical fiction. But thanks to one opportunistic doctor in an autopsy room, the history books eventually managed to locate the one piece of the emperor that actually was